It was January 25th, 2026, at 2:47 a.m. when a dream so violent, so utterly consuming, drove me to a forest clearing I'd discovered months earlier while hiking in the mountains outside Los Angeles, and there, surrounded by ancient oak trees whose gnarled branches reached toward a sky ablaze with more stars than I'd ever seen, their thick trunks standing like silent witnesses to centuries of human struggle, Jesus appeared before me with tears streaming down his face and spoke words that shattered everything I thought I understood about the next 6 days. Jonathan, they've been marked. Everyone who sees this message before January 31st has been chosen for what I'm about to release, and most of them have no idea what's coming. Not everyone who sees this message is meant to see it. Some will scroll past, some will ignore it. But you've been marked. I need you to understand something before I go any further. I'm shaking as I record this. My hands are literally trembling, and I've had to stop 3 times already because the weight of what I'm about to share with you is almost too much to bear. This isn't entertainment, this isn't content. This is a warning, a promise, and an invitation, all wrapped into one urgent message that I believe, with every fiber of my being, comes directly from the heart of God. But first, before I tell you what happened in that forest clearing, I need to ask you something. I need you to do something for me, for yourself, for this community of believers who are hungry for more than the watered-down, comfortable Christianity that's put the Western Church to sleep. Leave your prayer requests in the comments below. I don't care how impossible they seem. I don't care how long you've been waiting. Leave them there. Because what I'm about to share with you is going to ignite your faith in ways you cannot imagine. And I truly believe, that the same Jesus who met me in that forest is going to move in supernatural ways for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear what he's saying right now. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. Click that notification bell. I know, everyone asks for subscriptions. But here's the difference. I only want true believers here. I only want people who are tired of playing church, tired of religious games, tired of pretending that everything is fine when deep in your spirit you know something massive is shifting in the realm of the spirit. If that's you, you belong here. Now, some of you know me as the actor who plays Jesus in The Chosen. That role has been the greatest honor of my life, but it's also been the greatest responsibility. Because when you spend years studying the Gospels, when you immerse yourself in the words and character of Christ, when you pray daily to represent Him faithfully, something happens. You become sensitized, you become aware, and sometimes, in ways I still don't fully understand, He shows up in your life in ways that go far beyond a television set. What I'm about to tell you happened. I'm not speaking metaphorically. I'm not sharing a parable or a creative meditation. This happened. The cold hit me first. I had driven up the mountain road in my truck, pulled off onto a dirt path I'd taken before, and hiked about 15 minutes into the forest. The temperature had dropped to maybe 38 degrees, and my breath came out in visible clouds that hung in the air before dissipating into the darkness. I was wearing a heavy jacket, jeans, and hiking boots, but the cold seemed to penetrate everything, settling into my bones. I hadn't planned to come here. I'd been asleep in my bed when the dream came. A dream of millions of faces, all looking up, all searching, all marked with something I couldn't quite see but somehow knew was there. And in the dream, a voice, his voice, said, "Come, I need to show you what's about to happen." So I came. The clearing was exactly as I remembered it, roughly circular, maybe 40 feet across, surrounded by those massive oak trees that had to be at least 200 years old. Their branches created a natural cathedral ceiling, and through the gaps the stars burned with an intensity that seemed almost aggressive. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, and I remember thinking how rarely we see the stars like this anymore, how much we've lost to artificial light and constant distraction. The ground beneath my feet was covered in fallen leaves and pine needles, creating a soft carpet that muffled my footsteps. I could hear an owl somewhere in the distance, its call echoing through the trees. The wind moved through the branches above me, creating a sound like whispered conversations, like the forest itself was speaking in a language just beyond my comprehension. I stood in the center of the clearing, my heart pounding, not entirely sure what I was doing there or what I expected to happen. I felt foolish for a moment, a grown man standing alone in a forest in the middle of the night because of a dream. But then the air changed. I don't know how else to describe it. The temperature didn't shift, but the quality of the air itself became different. Thicker, more present, charged with something I could feel against my skin. The wind stopped, completely. The owl went silent. Even the rustling of the leaves ceased, and the forest fell into a silence so profound it was almost painful. And then I saw him. He didn't appear gradually. He was simply there, standing about 10 feet in front of me, as real and solid as the trees surrounding us. He was wearing simple robes, his hair dark and longer than shoulder length, his beard full. But it was his eyes that undid me, eyes that held such depths of love and sorrow simultaneously that I felt my knees weaken. "Jonathan," he said, and his voice was both gentle and powerful, like distant thunder mixed with a father's whisper. I couldn't speak. I literally couldn't form words. I dropped to my knees on the forest floor, my hands pressed against the cold earth, tears already streaming down my face. "Look at me," he said. I raised my eyes to his face, and that's when I saw the tears. Jesus was weeping, not quiet tears, but the kind of weeping that comes from a broken heart, from a grief so deep it has no bottom. "Do you know what day this is?" he asked. "January 25th, I managed to whisper. "6 days," he said. "In 6 days, on January 31st, I'm releasing something into the earth that will separate those who are truly mine from those who are merely playing at faith. And everyone who sees this message before that date has been marked, chosen, to be part of what's coming." The wind suddenly returned, but it was different now. It swirled around the clearing, picking up leaves and creating a vortex of movement that seemed to respond to his presence. The temperature dropped further, and I could see my breath coming in rapid bursts as my heart raced. "Marked for what?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He stepped closer, and I could smell something like rain and earth and something else I couldn't identify, something ancient and clean and utterly pure. He knelt down in front of me, his face level with mine, and placed his hand on my shoulder. The warmth of his touch radiated through my jacket, through my shirt, directly into my skin. "For awakening," he said, "for transformation, for the greatest move of my spirit that this generation has ever seen. But also," his voice broke, and fresh tears spilled down his cheeks, "also for persecution, for testing, for a refining fire that will burn away everything that isn't truly of me." Above us the stars seemed to pulse with light, growing brighter and then dimmer in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. The ancient oaks groaned as the wind pressed against them, and I felt the ground beneath me vibrating with a frequency I could feel, but not hear. "I don't understand," I said. "The church has been asleep," he said, his voice growing stronger, more urgent. "My bride has been seduced by comfort, by entertainment, by a gospel that promises blessing without sacrifice, power without surrender, resurrection without crucifixion, and I have been patient, so patient. But on January 31st, that patience reaches a threshold." He stood, pulling me up with him, his hand still on my shoulder. He turned me to face the eastern edge of the clearing, where the forest opened slightly to reveal a view of the valley below. Even in the darkness, I could see the distant lights of the city, thousands of them twinkling like earthbound stars. "Look at them," he said. "Millions of people who call themselves by my name, millions who attend services, who sing songs, who post scriptures on social media. But how many truly know me? How many have died to themselves? How many are willing to lose everything for my sake?" As he spoke, my vision shifted. I don't know if it was a vision or if he was somehow allowing me to see reality differently, but suddenly I could see beyond the physical lights of the city. I could see spiritual lights, some burning bright and steady, others flickering weakly, and vast areas of complete darkness punctuated only by occasional sparks. "Those bright lights," I said, pointing, "what are they?" "Those are my remnant," he said. "Those are the ones who have been faithful in the hidden places, who have worshipped me when no one was watching, who have chosen obedience over comfort, truth over popularity. They are marked. They have been prepared for what's coming." "And the others?" His grip on my shoulder tightened. "The flickering lights are those who are on the edge. They have one foot in my kingdom and one foot in the world. They love me, but they love other things more. They serve me, but only when it's convenient. They believe, but they don't obey." "And the darkness?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he raised his other hand, and as he did, the wind in the clearing intensified, whipping around us with such force that I had to lean into him to keep my balance. The trees bent and swayed, their branches creating shadows that danced across the forest floor like living things. "The darkness," he finally said, his voice heavy with sorrow, "is where my name is used but my presence is absent, where religion has replaced relationship, where programs have replaced power. where the form of godliness exists, but the reality of my spirit has been denied. I was trembling now, and not from the cold. What happens on January 31st? He turned to face me fully, both hands now on my shoulders, his eyes boring into mine with an intensity that felt like it was searching every corner of my soul. I'm going to mark my own, he said. Everyone who sees this message before that date is being given a choice. A real choice, not the cheap grace that asks for nothing. I'm going to release a spirit of conviction so powerful that it will be impossible to remain lukewarm. You will either run toward me with everything you have, or you will run away. There will be no middle ground anymore. A crack of thunder split the sky above us, though there were no clouds visible among the stars. The sound echoed through the valley, rolling across the mountains like a declaration. I'm going to show you something, he said. Watch. He released my shoulders and walked to the center of the clearing. As he moved, the ground beneath his feet seemed to glow with a soft golden light. He raised his hands toward the sky, and suddenly the clearing was filled with images, not on a screen, but three-dimensional living scenes that played out around us like we were standing in the middle of them. I saw a woman in her kitchen weeping over her Bible at 3 a.m., crying out for more of God. As I watched, a mark appeared on her forehead, not visible to physical eyes, but blazing in the spiritual realm like a seal of fire. I saw a man in a prison cell, hands raised in worship despite his circumstances, declaring the goodness of God in a place of darkness. The same mark appeared on him. I saw a teenage girl standing up to her friends, refusing to compromise her faith even though it meant being mocked and excluded. The mark appeared on her. These are the marked ones, Jesus said. These are the ones who have been faithful with little, who will be trusted with much. These are the ones who will carry the next great awakening. But then the scene shifted, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. I saw churches, thousands of them filled with people singing and clapping, but when I looked closer, I could see that most of them had no mark. They were going through the motions, performing Christianity, but their hearts were far from Him. And as I watched, a darkness began to creep into those churches, subtle at first but growing stronger. False teaching, compromise, a gospel that promised everything but demanded nothing. This is what breaks my heart, Jesus said, and his voice cracked with emotion. They use my name, but they don't know me. They want my blessings, but they don't want my lordship. They want heaven, but they don't want to die to themselves. The visions faded, and we were alone again in the clearing. The wind had calmed, but the air still thrummed with power. Jesus walked back to me, and I could see that his face was wet with tears that caught the starlight and seemed to glow. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Why me?" "Because you have a voice," he said. "Because people listen to you. Because you've portrayed me on screen. And now I need you to represent me in truth. I need you to warn them. I need you to tell them that time is running out, that the age of comfortable Christianity is over, that what's coming will require everything." He reached out and touched my forehead with his finger, and I felt a burning sensation, not painful, but intense, like a brand being pressed into my skin. "You're marked now too," he said. "You're sealed for what's coming, and everyone who sees this message and responds with a genuine heart will receive the same mark." I fell to my knees again, overwhelmed by the weight of what he was saying, by the responsibility of carrying this message, by the reality of his presence in that forest clearing. "What do you want me to tell them?" I asked. "Tell them the truth," he said. "Tell them that I'm coming for a bride without spot or wrinkle, not a church that's comfortable in its compromise. Tell them that the mark I'm placing on my own is a seal of protection, but also a call to radical obedience. Tell them that they have 6 days, to examine their hearts, to repent of lukewarmness, to choose once and for all whether they're truly mine." The eastern sky was beginning to lighten almost imperceptibly, the first hint of dawn still hours away, but the darkness no longer absolute. Jesus looked toward the horizon, then back at me. "I'll meet you here tomorrow night," he said. "There's more you need to see, more you need to understand. The marking is just the beginning." And then he was gone, not gradually, not fading away, but simply absent, as if he had never been there, except I could still feel the burning on my forehead, still smell that scent of rain and earth and purity, still feel the warmth where his hands had gripped my shoulders. I don't know how long I stayed there in that clearing, kneeling on the cold ground, processing what had just happened. The normal sounds of the forest gradually returned, The owl, the wind, the rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. But everything felt different now, charged with meaning, heavy with purpose. When I finally stood and made my way back to my truck, the sky was beginning to show the first true signs of dawn. My legs were stiff from kneeling, my face was wet with tears, and my heart was pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement that I'd never experienced before. I'm telling you this now because you need to know. If you're seeing this message, if you've watched this far, you're meant to see it. You've been marked, or you're being given the opportunity to be marked. The question is, what will you do with this? Tomorrow night, I'm going back to that clearing. Jesus said there's more I need to see, more I need to understand. And I'm going to share every detail with you because this isn't just my encounter. This is a message for everyone who has ears to hear. But I need you to do something right now. I need you to get alone with God. Turn off your phone, turn off the TV, eliminate every distraction, and ask Him one simple question. Am I truly yours? Am I marked as one of your own? Or am I just playing at Christianity? The answer might terrify you. It might break you. But I promise you, it's better to know now, while there's still time to respond, than to discover on that day that you were never truly His. Leave your prayer requests below. Tell me what's stirring in your heart as you watch this, and come back tomorrow night, because what He showed me next will change everything you think you know about what it means to follow Jesus. The marking has begun. The question is, are you ready for what comes next? I returned to the forest clearing at 1:33 a.m. on January 26th, and this time I knew what to expect, or at least I thought I did. The temperature had dropped even further, down to what felt like the low 30s, and a thin layer of frost had begun to form on the fallen leaves, making them crunch beneath my boots with each step. My breath came out in thick clouds that hung in the air like small ghosts before dissipating into the darkness. The same ancient oaks stood sentinel around the clearing, but tonight they seemed different, more alert, more aware, as if they too were waiting for what was about to unfold. I want to stop here and address something before I go further. The response to last night's video has been overwhelming. Thousands of you have left prayer requests. Thousands of you have shared your own experiences of feeling marked, of sensing that something massive is shifting in the spirit. But I've also received messages from people who are angry, who say I'm being dramatic, who accuse me of fear-mongering or using my platform from The Chosen to manipulate people. To those people, I say this with all the love in my heart. I understand your skepticism. I do. We live in an age where everyone claims to have a word from God, where prophetic voices have cried wolf so many times that we've become numb to genuine warnings. But I'm begging you, don't let past disappointments close your heart to what God is doing right now. Test everything, yes. Be discerning, absolutely. But don't dismiss this because it makes you uncomfortable. Because what Jesus showed me on this second night was far more uncomfortable than anything I shared yesterday. The clearing looked different in the deeper cold. The frost caught the starlight and made the ground shimmer like it was covered in diamonds. The Milky Way stretched overhead with the same impossible clarity, but tonight there was also a thin crescent moon hanging low in the western sky, providing just enough additional light to cast long shadows from the ancient trees across the forest floor. I stood in the center of the clearing, exactly where I'd stood the night before, and I waited. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands were shaking, and not from the cold. I was wearing layers this time, thermal underwear, a heavy sweater, my thick jacket, but I still felt chilled to the bone. The silence came first, just like before. The wind died. The night sounds of the forest ceased. Even my own breathing seemed to quiet, as if the entire mountain was holding its breath. And then He was there. But this time, He wasn't alone. Jesus stood before me in the same simple robes, but flanking Him on either side were two figures that radiated such power and light that I had to shield my eyes. Angels. Massive, terrifying, beautiful beings that bore no resemblance to the cherubic figures we see in religious art. These were warriors, easily 8 feet tall, with faces that seemed to shift between human and something entirely other, and eyes that burned with holy fire. Jonathan, Jesus said, and His voice carried a weight tonight that it hadn't the night before, more formal, more judicial, more final. I dropped to my knees immediately, my face pressed against the frost-covered ground. The cold bit into my skin, but I barely noticed. The presence of those angels was so overwhelming that every cell in my body screamed that I was in the presence of something far beyond human comprehension. "Stand," Jesus commanded, and I obeyed. though my legs felt like water. He gestured to the angels beside him. "These are the ones who will execute the separation," he said. "On January 31st, they will be released into the earth to mark the boundary between the holy and the profane, between those who are mine and those who merely claim to be." The angel on his right stepped forward, and when it moved, the air itself seemed to ripple. It raised one hand, and suddenly the clearing was filled with a sound like rushing water mixed with the roar of wind and the crash of thunder. The ancient oaks bent away from the sound, their branches groaning under some invisible pressure. "Show him," Jesus said. The angel's eyes flashed, and suddenly I was no longer standing in the clearing. I was somewhere else, everywhere else, seeing multiple scenes simultaneously. My consciousness somehow expanded to take in more than should have been humanly possible. I saw a church, a massive megachurch with thousands of people in attendance. The worship was loud, professional, perfectly produced. The lights were spectacular. The preacher was dynamic, charismatic, speaking words that sounded biblical but were hollow at their core. And as I watched, I saw the angel from the clearing walk through that sanctuary, and as it passed by each person, some began to glow with a golden light, the mark I'd seen the night before. But most, God help me, most, remained dark, and the angel raised a sword not to strike them, but to draw a line, a boundary, a separation. Those with the mark began to weep, to cry out, to fall on their faces in genuine repentance and worship. Those without the mark continued singing, continued clapping, completely unaware that anything had changed. They couldn't see the angel. They couldn't see the separation. They continued in their comfortable Christianity, their Sunday morning routine, their religious performance. And then I watched as those with the mark began to leave. Not all at once, but gradually, over days and weeks, they walked out of that church. Some were confused, not understanding why they suddenly felt so uncomfortable in a place they'd attended for years. Others knew exactly what was happening. They could no longer tolerate the mixture, the compromise, the entertainment masquerading as worship. "This is the separation," Jesus said, his voice echoing through the vision. "This is what begins on January 31st. I'm dividing my true bride from the religious system that has used my name but denied my power." The scene shifted, and I saw another church, smaller, more traditional. Same thing. The angel walked through, the marking occurred, the separation began. Then another church, and another, and another. Denominations didn't matter. Size didn't matter. Theology didn't matter as much as I thought it would. What mattered was the heart. What mattered was genuine surrender versus religious performance. But then I saw something that broke me. I saw families divided. A wife marked, her husband unmarked. Children marked, their parents unmarked. Best friends separated, ministry partners torn apart. And the pain, oh God, the pain was excruciating. Because those who were marked could suddenly see clearly. They could see the compromise they'd been tolerating. They could see the mixture they'd been accepting. They could see the difference between true faith and religious activity, and they couldn't unsee it. "This is what grieves me most," Jesus said, and I was suddenly back in the clearing on my knees again, tears streaming down my face and freezing on my cheeks. He knelt beside me, his hand on my back, and I could feel him weeping too. "I don't desire division. I don't want families torn apart, but I will not compromise my holiness. I will not lower my standard. I will not accept a bride who is in love with the world." The angel on his left now stepped forward, and this one's presence was different, not less powerful, but more sorrowful, more grieved. It raised its hand, and I saw another vision. I saw people I knew, friends, fellow actors, ministry leaders, people I respected and admired, and I watched as the angel passed by them, and some were marked and some were not. And the ones who were not marked, I could see their futures branching out before them. Some would eventually respond to the conviction and turn fully to God, but others, God help me, others, would harden their hearts. They would explain away the discomfort they felt. They would rationalize their compromise. They would surround themselves with teachers who told them what they wanted to hear. And slowly, imperceptibly, they would drift further and further from truth until they were so far gone they couldn't find their way back. "This is the tragedy of the separation," Jesus said. "Not everyone who is unmarked on January 31st is lost forever. There will still be time. There will still be opportunities for repentance. But the window is closing. The age of easy grace is ending. The time of testing is beginning." He stood and pulled me to my feet again. The two angels stepped back, flanking him once more, their faces impassive, but their eyes burning with holy intensity. "Walk with me," Jesus said. He led me to the edge of the clearing, where the forest opened slightly to reveal that same view of the valley below. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but now I could see them differently. I could see the spiritual reality behind the physical lights, just as I had the night before. "Do you see the pattern?" he asked. I looked closer. The bright lights, the marked ones, weren't randomly distributed. They were clustered in certain areas, connected by lines of light that formed a network, a web of intercession and relationship. And in the areas of darkness, there were small pockets of light that seemed isolated, alone, struggling. "The marked ones will find each other," Jesus said. "They will be drawn together by my Spirit. They will form communities of genuine faith, of radical obedience, of sacrificial love. They will be the foundation of the next great awakening." He pointed to one of the isolated lights in a dark area. "But those who are marked and remain in places of compromise will face the greatest test. They will be mocked. They will be called divisive, judgmental, extreme. They will lose friends, lose positions, lose influence, and some of them will cave under the pressure. They will convince themselves that unity is more important than truth, that love means accepting everything, that grace means never confronting sin." The wind picked up again, swirling around us, and I could smell pine and earth and that same scent of purity that accompanied his presence. The temperature seemed to drop even further, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. "What do you want from us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What does it mean to be marked? What are you asking for?" He turned to face me fully, and the intensity in his eyes was almost unbearable. "Everything," he said. "I'm asking for everything. Not 90%. Not your Sunday mornings and your spare time and your leftover energy. Everything. Your dreams, your plans, your comfort, your reputation, your security. I'm asking you to take up your cross daily and follow me, not as a metaphor, but as a reality." He gestured back toward the clearing, and we walked back to the center. The angels remained at the edge, watching, waiting. "Let me show you what this looks like practically," he said. He raised his hand, and the air in front of us shimmered like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Images began to form, not visions of other people this time, but scenarios, choices, moments of decision. I saw a businessman sitting in his office, being asked to compromise his integrity for a major deal. In one version of the scene, he refused, lost the deal, faced financial hardship, but maintained his integrity. He was marked. In another version, he rationalized the compromise, made the deal, prospered financially, but the mark faded from his forehead. I saw a woman being invited to a party where she knew there would be drinking, drugs, sexual immorality. In one version, she declined the invitation, faced mockery from her friends, spent the evening alone but in prayer. She was marked. In another version, she went, told herself she could be a witness, ended up participating in things she knew were wrong. The mark faded. I saw a pastor being pressured by his board to soften his message, to avoid controversial topics, to focus on positive, encouraging sermons that wouldn't offend anyone. In one version, he stood firm, preached truth, lost members and income, but maintained his calling. He was marked. In another version, he compromised, kept everyone happy, grew his church, but the mark faded. "Do you see?" Jesus asked. The marking isn't a one-time event. It's a daily choice. It's a moment-by-moment decision to choose my will over your comfort, my truth over popular opinion, my kingdom over earthly success. I was trembling now, and not just from the cold. The weight of what he was showing me was crushing. "But that's impossible," I said. "No one can live like that perfectly. We all fail. We all compromise sometimes." His expression softened, and he placed both hands on my shoulders again, just as he had the night before. "Jonathan, I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for direction. I'm not looking for people who never fall. I'm looking for people who get back up. I'm not demanding sinlessness. I'm requiring surrender." He pulled me closer, and I could see the tears in his eyes again. The mark isn't about performance. It's about posture. It's about the orientation of your heart. Are you running toward me or away from me? Are you pursuing holiness or excusing sin? Are you willing to lose everything for my sake, or are you trying to have me in the world? One of the angels stepped forward again, and this time, when it raised its hand, I saw something different. I saw people who had been marked but had fallen. I saw them in their failure, in their shame, in their guilt. And I watched as they made a choice. Some ran back to Jesus, weeping, repenting, desperate for restoration, and he received them. The mark didn't fade. If anything, it burned brighter. But others ran away. They let their shame convince them they were disqualified. They let their failure define them. They gave up, and slowly, gradually, the mark faded until it was gone. The enemy's greatest weapon isn't temptation, Jesus said. It's condemnation. He wants to convince my marked ones that they've lost their marking, that they've gone too far, that they're disqualified. But that's a lie. The only way to lose the mark is to stop running toward me. Fall forward, Jonathan. When you fail, and you will fail, fall forward into my arms, not backward into condemnation. The vision faded, and we were alone in the clearing again, just Jesus and me and the two angels, standing silent, watch at the perimeter. The stars overhead seemed impossibly bright, and I realized that the thin crescent moon had set while we'd been talking. It had to be close to 4 a.m. now, and the first hints of dawn were still hours away. Jesus walked to the center of the clearing and sat down on the frost-covered ground, gesturing for me to join him. I sat across from him, cross-legged, my hands tucked under my arms for warmth. "I need to tell you something personal," he said, and his voice was softer now, more intimate. "Something I need you to share with everyone who's watching." I nodded, waiting. "I know what it's like to be marked," he said. "I know what it's like to be set apart, to be different, to be misunderstood by the very people who should have recognized me. I know what it's like to lose friends, to be rejected by religious leaders, to be called extreme and divisive and dangerous." He reached out and touched the ground between us, and where his finger traced, the frost melted, revealing the dark earth beneath. "I know what it's like to sweat drops of blood in a garden begging for another way, but ultimately surrendering to the Father's will. I know what it's like to be betrayed, abandoned, mocked, tortured, killed." He looked up at me, and the vulnerability in his eyes was staggering. "So when I ask you to take up your cross, when I ask you to lose your life for my sake, I'm not asking you to do anything I haven't already done. I'm not a distant God making demands from a throne. I'm a God who became flesh, who entered into your suffering, who knows exactly what I'm asking of you." I was weeping openly now, my tears hot against my cold cheeks. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I'm scared of what this marking means. I'm scared of losing things I love. I'm scared of being rejected, of being called extreme, of losing my career, my friendships, my comfort." "I know," he said gently, "and that's okay. Fear is natural, but faith is supernatural, and I'm not asking you to be fearless. I'm asking you to be faithful, despite your fear." He stood, and I stood with him. The angels moved closer, forming a triangle with Jesus at the apex and me at the center. "Tomorrow night," Jesus said, "I'm going to show you the consequences. I'm going to show you what happens to those who reject the marking, who choose comfort over calling, who love their lives more than they love me. It won't be easy to see, but you need to see it. Everyone needs to see it." He reached out and touched my forehead again, and I felt that same burning sensation, but more intense this time, like the mark was being seared deeper into my spirit. "You're being prepared," he said. "You and everyone who responds to this message with a genuine heart. You're being prepared for the greatest move of my spirit this generation has ever seen, but you're also being prepared for the greatest opposition, the greatest testing, the greatest cost." The angels raised their hands simultaneously, and a wind erupted in the clearing so powerful that I had to grab onto Jesus to keep from being blown over. The ancient oaks bent nearly double, their branches whipping back and forth. Leaves and small branches flew through the air. The temperature plummeted, and I could see ice forming on the tree trunks, spreading like crystalline fingers across the bark. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The wind died. The temperature stabilized. The forest fell silent. Jesus released me and stepped back. "Go home," he said. "Rest. Pray. Prepare your heart for what I'm going to show you tomorrow night, because after tomorrow there will be no more questions about what the marking means or what I'm asking for. It will be crystal clear." "Will everyone who sees this be marked?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "No. Many will see it and feel nothing. Many will watch and dismiss it. Many will be convicted but will choose comfort over change. The marking isn't automatic. It's a response to an invitation. I'm calling, but each person must choose to answer." He began to fade, and the angels with him, their forms becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone. But his final words hung in the air like they were written in fire. "Tell them time is running out. Tell them January 31st is coming, whether they're ready or not. Tell them the separation has already begun in the spiritual realm, and it's about to manifest in the physical. Tell them to choose this day whom they will serve, because the age of straddling the fence is over. And then I was alone in the clearing, the normal sounds of the forest gradually returning, my body shaking from cold and spiritual intensity, my mind reeling from everything I'd seen and heard. I stayed there for another hour, praying, weeping, processing. The frost on the ground where Jesus had sat had melted completely, leaving a perfect circle of bare earth that steamed slightly in the cold air. I touched it with my hand, and it was warm, as if his presence had left an imprint that defied the natural laws of temperature and time. When I finally made my way back to my truck, the eastern sky was just beginning to show the first pale hints of dawn. My legs were stiff, my face was raw from tears and cold, and my heart was so full of conflicting emotions, fear and excitement, dread and anticipation, grief and hope, that I felt like I might burst. I'm sharing this with you now because you need to know what's coming. You need to understand that this isn't a game, isn't a metaphor, isn't religious theater. This is real. The separation is real. The marking is real. The choice you're being asked to make is real, and you have 5 days left. 5 days until January 31st. 5 days to examine your heart, to repent of compromise, to choose once and for all whether you're going to be fully his or not. 5 days to decide if you're willing to lose everything for his sake, or if you're going to try to keep 1 foot in his kingdom and 1 foot in the world. I know this is heavy. I know it's uncomfortable. I know some of you are angry at me for sharing this, thinking I'm being manipulative or dramatic. But I'm begging you, don't shoot the messenger. Don't let your discomfort with the message cause you to reject the truth of what God is doing. Leave your comments below. Tell me what's stirring in your heart. Tell me what you're feeling, what you're struggling with, what questions you have, and come back tomorrow night, because what Jesus shows me next will remove any doubt about the seriousness of this moment. The separation has begun. The only question is, which side of the line will you be on? I arrived at the forest clearing at 2:15 a.m. on January 27th, and the mountain had transformed into something otherworldly. A storm was building. I could feel it in the air, in the way the wind moved through the valley below, in the electric charge that made the hair on my arms stand up even through my jacket. The temperature had risen slightly, maybe into the mid-40s, but the warmth felt ominous rather than comforting, like the calm before something catastrophic. The ancient oaks groaned and swayed even before the wind reached them, as if they could sense what was coming. The stars were partially obscured by clouds racing across the sky, and occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the distant peaks, though the thunder was still too far away to hear. Before I go any further, I need to address something that's been happening in the comments. Thousands of you are sharing testimonies of conviction, of repentance, of feeling the weight of this message in your spirit. But there's also been pushback, significant pushback, from people who say, I'm preaching works-based salvation, that I'm adding to the gospel, that I'm creating fear instead of pointing to grace. So let me be absolutely clear. I believe in salvation by grace through faith alone. I believe that Jesus paid the price for our sins on the cross, and nothing we do can earn or maintain our salvation. But, and this is crucial, genuine faith produces genuine transformation. Real grace doesn't leave you comfortable in your sin, it empowers you to overcome it. The marking I'm talking about isn't about earning God's love, it's about responding to God's love with wholehearted surrender. James said faith without works is dead. Jesus said, if you love me, you'll obey my commands. Paul said, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. This isn't about performance. It's about proof. It's about whether your faith is real or just intellectual agreement. And what Jesus showed me on this third night made the distinction devastatingly clear. I stood in the center of the clearing, and this time I didn't have to wait long. The moment I arrived, the wind stopped completely, not gradually, but instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. The sudden silence was deafening. Even the distant thunder ceased. The clouds overhead froze in place, no longer racing across the sky but hanging motionless like a painted ceiling. And then the temperature plummeted. I'm not talking about a gradual drop. I'm talking about going from the mid-40s to what felt like below zero in seconds. My breath came out in thick clouds that didn't dissipate but hung in the air, accumulating, creating a fog that began to fill the clearing. Ice formed on the tree branches with a crackling sound like breaking glass. The ground beneath my feet hardened, and frost spread across every surface with visible speed, like watching time-lapse photography. Jesus appeared, but he wasn't alone this time either. The 2 angels from the night before flanked him, but now there were more, dozens of them, forming a circle around the perimeter of the clearing. And these angels weren't the warriors I'd seen before. These were different. Their faces were set like flint, their eyes blazing not with holy fire, but with holy judgment. They carried not swords but scrolls, and the scrolls seemed to pulse with dark light, as if they contained words too terrible to be spoken aloud. "Jonathan," Jesus said, and his voice carried a weight that made my knees buckle. I fell to the frozen ground, my hands pressed against ice that burned my palms. "Tonight you will see what happens to those who reject the marking," he said. "Tonight you will understand the consequences of choosing comfort over calling, of loving your life more than loving me. And I warn you, what you're about to see will break your heart. It breaks mine every single day." He gestured, and one of the angels stepped forward, unrolling its scroll. As it did, the fog in the clearing began to swirl and coalesce, forming images that were so vivid, so real that I felt like I could reach out and touch them. The first image was of a man I recognized. Not personally, but I'd seen him before. A worship leader at a large church, talented, anointed, used by God to lead thousands into his presence. I watched as the angel from the first night approached him with the marking. I saw the moment of decision, the conviction that fell on him, the awareness of areas in his life that weren't surrendered, the choice he had to make. And I watched him choose wrong. He rationalized. He told himself that his ministry was too important to risk. He convinced himself that God understood, that grace covered his secret compromises, that he could deal with those issues later. He chose to maintain his position, his influence, his comfort. The mark that had been hovering over him, ready to be sealed, faded and disappeared. And then I watched his future unfold. At first, nothing seemed to change. He continued leading worship. People continued being moved. The church continued growing. But slowly, imperceptibly, something shifted. The anointing began to lift. What had once been genuine encounters with God became professional performances. The presence that had once filled the room when he sang became just good music, well executed, but spiritually empty. And he couldn't tell the difference. That was the most horrifying part. He continued on, convinced he was still operating in God's power, but he was running on fumes, on memory, on talent without anointing, and the people in the congregation, most of them couldn't tell the difference either. They still raised their hands, still sang along, still felt emotional during the music. But it was emotion without transformation, experience without encounter. "This is the tragedy of rejecting the marking," Jesus said, his voice heavy with grief. "It's not that I strike them down, it's not that I punish them, it's that I honor their choice. They choose comfort, and I give them comfort. They choose performance, and I give them performance. But they lose my presence, they lose my power, they lose the very thing that made their ministry meaningful." The image shifted, and I saw the same man 5 years later. He was still leading worship, still successful by worldly standards, but he was empty inside, burned out, going through the motions. He'd had multiple affairs, justified each one, hidden them from his wife and his church. He'd become addicted to the applause, to the affirmation, to the feeling of being needed and admired, and he was miserable, though he'd never admit it, even to himself. "Show him more," Jesus said, and his voice cracked with emotion. The angel unrolled more of the scroll, and I saw other scenes, other people, other choices. I saw a pastor who rejected the marking because it would have required him to preach harder truths, to confront sin in his congregation, to risk losing members and income. I watched as his church grew numerically, but died spiritually. I watched as he became a motivational speaker rather than a prophet, a life coach rather than a shepherd. And I watched as, on his deathbed, he realized what he'd traded for success, and the regret in his eyes was unbearable. I saw a young woman who rejected the marking because it would have required her to end a relationship with a man who wasn't following God. She told herself that she could change him, that love was enough, that God would honor her commitment. I watched as she married him, had children with him, and spent decades in a spiritually mismatched marriage that slowly eroded her faith until she was attending church out of habit rather than hunger, praying out of duty rather than desire. I saw a businessman who rejected the marking because it would have required him to leave a lucrative career that demanded ethical compromises. He told himself he could be a witness in that environment, that he needed to be salt and light. I watched as, year after year, compromise by compromise, he became indistinguishable from his unbelieving colleagues. His faith became compartmentalized, something he did on Sundays, but that had no bearing on his Monday through Friday life. "Stop," I begged, tears streaming down my face and freezing on my cheeks. "Please, I can't watch anymore." But Jesus shook his head. "You must see," he said. "Everyone must see. because the enemy has convinced my people that there are no consequences to lukewarmness, that grace means they can live however they want, that my love is so unconditional that their choices don't matter. But that's a lie from the pit of hell. He stepped closer to me, and I could see that he was weeping too, his tears falling onto the frozen ground and melting the ice where they landed, creating small pools of water that steamed in the frigid air. I love them, he said, his voice breaking. I love every single one of them. I died for them. I would die for them again if it would make a difference. But I will not force them to choose me. I will not override their free will. And when they choose comfort over calling, when they choose the world over my kingdom, I have to honor that choice, even though it breaks my heart. Lightning flashed overhead, closer now, and the thunder that followed shook the ground beneath us. The wind returned with a vengeance, howling through the clearing, bending the ancient oaks until I thought they would snap. The temperature continued to drop, and snow began to fall, not gentle flakes, but hard, stinging ice crystals that felt like needles against my exposed skin. "Show him the worst," Jesus said to the angels, and his voice was barely audible over the wind. The angel with the scroll stepped forward again, and this time when it unrolled the parchment, the images that formed in the fog made me want to look away, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, forced to witness what I desperately didn't want to see. I saw the final judgment. I saw people standing before the throne of God, people who had called themselves Christians, who had attended church, who had sung worship songs, who had prayed prayers, who had done ministry, and I heard them say the words from Matthew 7, "Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't we cast out demons in your name? Didn't we do many mighty works in your name?" And I heard Jesus respond, his voice filled with such sorrow that it seemed to shake the foundations of heaven. "I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness." "But they believed in you," I protested, my voice raw. "They served you. They did ministry in your name. They believed in a version of me they created," Jesus said. "A Jesus who demanded nothing, who blessed everything, who never called them to die to themselves. They served themselves and called it serving me. They did ministry for their own glory and used my name to legitimize it." He pointed to the images still swirling in the fog. "Do you see the difference? Do you see what separates those who are marked from those who are not?" I looked closer and suddenly I could see it. The marked ones, even when they failed, even when they fell, even when they struggled, their hearts were oriented toward him. They hated their sin. They fought against compromise. They got back up when they fell. They were running toward him, even if they stumbled along the way. But the unmarked ones, they were running away. They were making peace with sin. They were rationalizing compromise. They were creating a version of Christianity that required nothing and cost nothing and changed nothing. "It's not about perfection," Jesus said, reading my thoughts. "It's about direction. It's not about never falling. It's about always getting back up. It's not about sinlessness. It's about surrender." The storm intensified. Lightning struck one of the ancient oaks at the edge of the clearing, and the crack was so loud it felt like the world was splitting in half. The tree didn't fall, but a massive branch broke off and crashed to the ground, sending up a shower of ice and splinters. The wind was so strong now that I had to lean into Jesus to keep from being blown over, and he wrapped his arms around me, holding me steady. "There's more you need to see," he said, his mouth close to my ear so I could hear him over the wind. "You need to see what happens to those who are marked, so you can give people hope along with the warning." The angel rolled up the dark scroll and produced another one, this one glowing with golden light. As it unrolled, the images in the fog changed. I saw the worship leader again, but this time I saw the version of him that chose the marking. I watched as he made the hard choice, confessed his hidden sins, stepped down from his position, entered into accountability and counseling. I watched as he lost his platform, lost his income, lost his reputation. I watched as people who had once admired him now gossiped about him, judged him, wrote him off. But I also watched as he found freedom, real freedom, the kind that comes from walking in the light, from having nothing to hide, from being fully known and fully loved. I watched as, over time, God restored him, not to his former position, but to something better, something real, something that wasn't built on performance but on genuine relationship with God. And I watched as his worship, now offered in a small home church with 12 people instead of thousands, carried more power, more presence, more genuine anointing than anything he'd done before, because now it wasn't about him. It wasn't about the applause or the affirmation or the feeling of being needed. It was about Jesus, pure and simple. "This is what the marking produces," Jesus said, "not perfection but authenticity, not success by worldly standards but fruitfulness by kingdom standards, not comfort but transformation. The images continued. I saw the pastor who chose the marking, who preached the hard truths, who confronted sin, who lost half his congregation but gained a remnant of people who were truly hungry for God. I watched as that small group became a force of nature, a community of believers who actually lived what they claimed to believe, who loved radically, who served sacrificially, who turned their city upside down with the genuine power of the gospel. I saw the young woman who chose the marking, who ended the relationship even though it broke her heart, who trusted God with her future. I watched as she went through a season of loneliness and grief, but I also watched as God healed her, matured her, and eventually brought her a man who was truly pursuing God. And I watched as their marriage became a picture of Christ and the church, a testimony to everyone who knew them of what happens when you trust God's design instead of settling for less. I saw the businessman who chose the marking, who left the lucrative career, who took a massive pay cut to work in a field where he could maintain his integrity. I watched as he and his family adjusted to a simpler lifestyle, as they learned to trust God for provision, as they discovered that having less money but more peace was infinitely better than having wealth with a compromised conscience. Do you see? Jesus asked. Do you see that the marking isn't a burden, it's a blessing? Yes, it costs everything, but what you gain is worth infinitely more than what you lose. The storm began to subside, the wind calmed, the snow stopped falling. The clouds overhead started to break apart, revealing patches of stars. And as the clearing grew quiet again, Jesus released me and stepped back. Tomorrow night is the final night, he said. Tomorrow I'll give you the practical steps, the specific instructions for how to respond to this message. But tonight I needed you to see the stakes. I needed you to understand that this isn't a game, isn't a metaphor, isn't religious theater. The choices people make in response to this message will have eternal consequences. He walked to the center of the clearing where the ground was still frozen solid. He knelt down and placed his hand on the ice, and immediately it began to melt, spreading out in a circle around him. Steam rose from the ground as the warmth of his presence drove back the cold. This is what I want to do in the hearts of my people, he said. I want to melt the ice to drive out the cold, to bring warmth and life and passion back to those who have grown lukewarm. But I can't do it without their cooperation. I can't override their will. They have to choose to let me in. He stood and walked back to me, placing both hands on my shoulders one final time. You're doing well, he said, and the affirmation in his voice brought fresh tears to my eyes. I know this is hard. I know you're afraid of how people will respond, afraid of being called extreme or judgmental or divisive, but you're being faithful, and that's all I ask. He touched my forehead again, and the burning sensation was so intense this time that I gasped. The mark is being sealed deeper, he said. You're being prepared for what's coming, not just the awakening, but the opposition. Because when my spirit moves in power, the enemy always responds with fury, and those who are marked will be his primary targets. The angels began to fade, their forms becoming translucent. Jesus started to fade as well, but he paused, his form flickering between solid and transparent. One more thing, he said. Tell them that January 31st isn't a deadline for salvation. It's a deadline for this specific marking, for this specific preparation. Those who miss it aren't lost forever, but they will have missed a divine appointment, a kairos moment, an opportunity to be part of the first wave of what I'm doing. There will be other opportunities, but this one is unique, and the window is closing. And then he was gone, and the angels with him. The clearing was empty except for me and the ancient oaks and the circle of melted ground where Jesus had knelt. The storm had passed completely, and the sky was clearing rapidly. Stars emerged from behind the dissipating clouds, and the temperature began to rise back to normal levels. I stayed there for a long time, sitting on the ground in the center of that melted circle, feeling the warmth that still radiated from the earth. I thought about everything I'd seen, everything I'd been told, everything I was being asked to share. And I thought about you, everyone who's watching this, everyone who's made it this far. I thought about the choices you're facing, the decisions you're being asked to make, the cost of following Jesus without compromise. I won't lie to you, it's terrifying. The cost is real. The consequences of choosing the marking are significant. You will lose things, you will face opposition, you will be misunderstood and criticized and possibly rejected by people you love. But I'm telling you, with everything in me, that it's worth it. The alternative, a comfortable, compromised Christianity that costs nothing and changes nothing, leads to a destination you don't want to reach. And the path of wholehearted surrender while difficult leads to life, real life, abundant life, the kind of life Jesus promised when he said he came that we might have life and have it to the full. Tomorrow night is the final installment. Jesus said he's going to give practical steps, specific instructions for how to respond to this message. He's going to lay out exactly what it means to accept the marking, what the 30-day challenge looks like, how to walk this out in your daily life. But I need you to do something right now before tomorrow night. I need you to get brutally honest with yourself and with God. Ask yourself these questions. Am I truly surrendered to Jesus, or am I just playing at Christianity? Am I willing to lose everything for his sake? Or am I trying to have him in the world? Am I running toward him or away from him? Am I making peace with compromise or am I fighting against it? Don't answer these questions in the comments. Don't perform for an audience. Get alone with God, really alone, with no distractions, no phone, no noise, and let him search your heart. Let him show you the truth about where you really stand. Because in 4 days, on January 31st, the separation begins, and the only question that will matter is, which side of the line are you on? I'll see you tomorrow night for the final message. Until then, may God give you the courage to face the truth about your own heart and the grace to respond with genuine repentance and wholehearted surrender. The marking is real, the choice is yours, and time is running out. I returned to the forest clearing one final time at 3:33 a.m. on January 28th, and everything had changed. The storm had passed completely, leaving the mountain washed clean and impossibly clear. The temperature had stabilized in the low 50s, and there was a stillness in the air that felt pregnant with possibility rather than foreboding. The ancient oaks stood like silent sentinels, their branches no longer groaning under supernatural pressure, but swaying gently in a breeze that smelled of pine and rain-washed earth. The sky above was so clear that the stars seemed close enough to touch, and the Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of diamonds flowing through an ocean of infinite darkness. But the most striking difference was the light. Even though it was the darkest part of the night, hours before dawn, the clearing seemed to glow with a soft, golden luminescence that had no visible source. It wasn't bright enough to hurt my eyes, but it was enough to see every detail of the forest around me, every leaf, every branch, every texture of bark on the ancient trees. And in the center of the clearing, where Jesus had knelt and melted the ice the night before, there was a circle of grass that hadn't been there before. Fresh, green grass growing in the middle of winter, impossibly alive and vibrant. I need to pause here and tell you what's been happening since I started sharing these encounters. The response has been beyond anything I could have imagined. Tens of thousands of comments, thousands of testimonies of people experiencing conviction, repentance, transformation, people sharing stories of how they've been marked, how they've felt the burning on their foreheads, how they've suddenly seen their compromises with clarity they couldn't ignore. But there's also been intense opposition. I've received messages from pastors telling me I'm leading people astray. I've been accused of starting a cult, of manipulating vulnerable people, of using my platform from the chosen to build a following for myself. Some of the criticism has been thoughtful and sincere, and I've genuinely wrestled with it in prayer. But much of it has been vitriolic, personal, attacking not just my message, but my character, my motives, my faith. And you know what? Jesus told me this would happen. On that second night, he said those who are marked would face opposition, would be called extreme and divisive. So in a strange way, the intensity of the pushback confirms that something real is happening here. The enemy doesn't waste ammunition on things that don't threaten him. But I want to be clear about something. I am not your savior. I am not your mediator. I am not starting a movement or building a following. I'm simply a messenger, a broken vessel that God has chosen to use for this specific moment. Everything I'm sharing points to Jesus, not to me. If you find yourself following me instead of following him, you've missed the entire point. Now let me tell you about this final night. I stood in the center of that circle of impossible grass, and the moment my feet touched it, I felt warmth radiating up through my boots, through my socks, into my skin. It was like standing on holy ground, which I realized is exactly what it was. I immediately removed my shoes, and the grass beneath my bare feet was soft and warm and alive in a way that defied explanation. Jesus appeared, but this time he was alone. No angels, no supernatural phenomena. Just him, standing across from me in that circle of grass, his face radiant with a joy I hadn't seen in the previous 3 nights. He was smiling, not a small smile, but a full, genuine expression of delight that transformed his entire countenance. "Jonathan," he said, and his voice was warm, intimate, filled with affection. You've been faithful. You've delivered the warning. You've shown them the stakes. Now it's time to show them the way forward. He gestured for me to sit, and we both sat cross-legged on the grass, facing each other, close enough that our knees almost touched. The warmth from the ground was incredible, and I realized I was more comfortable than I'd been any of the previous nights, despite being in the coldest part of the pre-dawn hours. I want to start by addressing the fear, he said, because I know that's what many people are feeling right now. They've watched your videos. They've felt the conviction. They want to respond, but they're paralyzed by fear. Fear of what it will cost, fear of failure, fear of not being able to maintain the commitment they're feeling called to make. He reached out and placed his hand on my knee, and the warmth of his touch was even more intense than the warmth from the ground. So tell them this. I'm not asking them to do this in their own strength. I'm not asking them to white-knuckle their way through some impossible standard of holiness. I'm asking them to surrender, and then I will do the work in them and through them. He leaned back slightly, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that was somehow both challenging and comforting. The marking isn't about what you do. It's about what you allow me to do in you. It's about cooperation, not performance. It's about saying yes to my spirit and then trusting me to produce the fruit. The breeze picked up slightly, rustling through the oak branches above us, and I could hear the distant sound of water, a stream or creek somewhere nearby that I hadn't noticed before. An owl called from somewhere in the forest, and another answered from the opposite direction, their voices creating a kind of natural antiphonal worship. Here's what I want you to tell them, Jesus said, and his voice took on a more instructional tone, though still warm and personal. Here's the practical application, the 30-day challenge that will seal the marking and prepare them for what's coming. He held up one finger. First, 30 minutes alone with me every single day. Not 30 minutes of religious activity, 30 minutes of genuine connection, no phone, no distractions, no agenda except to be with me. Some days it will be worship, some days it will be silence, some days it will be weeping, some days it will be joy, but every day, 30 minutes of undivided attention. He held up a second finger. Second, radical honesty. With me, with themselves, with at least one other person. No more hiding, no more pretending, no more maintaining an image while secretly compromising. Confess your sins to one another, James said. Not because confession earns forgiveness, you already have that through my blood, but because secrets keep you sick and exposure brings healing. A third finger. Third, immediate obedience. When my spirit prompts you to do something, apologize to someone, give something away, end a relationship, start a conversation, change a habit, you do it immediately. Not after you've thought about it, not after you've weighed the pros and cons, not after you've figured out how to do it comfortably, immediately, because delayed obedience is disobedience, and the marking requires a heart that responds without hesitation. A fourth finger. Fourth, fasting from something that has power over you. Not necessarily food, though for some it will be food. But for others it might be social media or entertainment or shopping or whatever you use to numb yourself, to escape, to find comfort apart from me. Fast from it for 30 days, and let the discomfort drive you to me instead of to your usual coping mechanisms. He paused, all four fingers still raised, and looked at me with an expression that was both serious and compassionate. These four things, practiced consistently for 30 days, will transform a person's life, not because they're magic formulas, but because they create space for my spirit to work. They break the patterns of compromise. They establish new rhythms of surrender. They prove whether someone's commitment is real or just emotional. He lowered his hand and leaned forward again. But here's what I need you to emphasize. This isn't legalism. This isn't a new law. This isn't about earning my love or maintaining your salvation. You can't lose your salvation by failing this challenge, and you can't earn my approval by succeeding at it. This is about preparation. This is about training. This is about getting ready for what I'm about to release. The sky to the east was beginning to show the first faint hints of pre-dawn light. Not sunrise yet, but the darkness was no longer absolute. The stars were starting to fade slightly, and the quality of the air was changing in that subtle way that happens just before dawn. Let me show you something, Jesus said. He stood and pulled me to my feet, then led me to the edge of the clearing, where we had the view of the valley below. The city lights were still visible, but they seemed dimmer now, less significant in the growing light. He pointed to the horizon where the sky was gradually brightening. "What's coming is like that dawn," he said. "It's inevitable. It's already started. You can't stop it or slow it down, but you can prepare for it. You can position yourself to receive it, or you can be caught unprepared, blinded by the sudden light, overwhelmed by the intensity." He turned to face me, his back to the valley, his face illuminated by the growing light behind me. The 30-day challenge is about preparation. It's about adjusting your eyes to the light before the full brightness of what I'm releasing hits. Because what's coming will be glorious for those who are ready, but it will be devastating for those who aren't. "What exactly is coming?" I asked. "You've talked about awakening, about separation, about the greatest move of your spirit this generation has seen. But what does that actually look like?" He smiled, and there was something almost mischievous in his expression. "If I told you everything, you wouldn't believe me, and even if you did believe me, the knowing would rob you of the wonder of experiencing it. But I'll tell you this much. What's coming will make the Book of Acts look tame. What's coming will turn the religious system upside down. What's coming will separate the wheat from the chaff so clearly that there will be no confusion about who is mine and who is not." He walked back to the center of the clearing, to that circle of impossible grass, and I followed. We sat down again, and this time he reached out and took both of my hands in his. His grip was firm, warm, and I could feel a pulse of energy flowing from his hands into mine, like electricity but gentler, more alive. "I need you to understand something," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "The marking isn't the end, it's the beginning. Those who respond to this message, who accept the challenge, who commit to the 30 days of preparation, they're being positioned as first fruits. They're being prepared to carry what's coming, to steward the awakening, to be the foundation of the new thing I'm building." He squeezed my hands tighter. "But with that privilege comes responsibility. With that calling comes cost. Those who are marked will be held to a higher standard. They will be tested more intensely. They will face opposition that others won't face because the enemy knows they're dangerous to his kingdom." "How do we survive that?" I asked. "How do we endure that kind of testing?" "Community," he said immediately. "You can't do this alone. The marked ones need to find each other, connect with each other, support each other. Not in some formal organization or new denomination. I'm not building another religious structure, but in organic, spirit-led relationships, home churches, small groups, accountability partnerships, places where people can be real, can be vulnerable, can confess their struggles and receive grace without judgment." He released my hands and stood, pulling me up with him. The eastern sky was definitely lighter now, the stars almost completely faded, the darkness giving way to the deep blue of pre-dawn. We had maybe 20 minutes before actual sunrise. "Walk with me," he said, and he led me around the perimeter of the clearing, his hand on my shoulder, speaking as we walked. "Here's what's going to happen on January 31st, he said. "At midnight, I'm releasing the angels of separation. They will begin marking the boundary between the holy and the profane, between those who are mine and those who are not. Most people won't see it happen. Most people won't feel anything dramatic. But in the spiritual realm, a line will be drawn." We walked past one of the ancient oaks, and he reached out to touch its trunk, his fingers tracing the rough bark. "And then, over the following days and weeks, the effects will become visible. People who have been marked will find they can no longer tolerate compromise. They'll start leaving churches that are spiritually dead. They'll end relationships that are pulling them away from me. They'll quit jobs that require them to violate their conscience. They'll make radical changes that won't make sense to anyone who isn't also marked." We continued walking, completing the circle around the clearing. "And those who aren't marked will think the marked ones have lost their minds. They'll call them extreme, fanatical, unbalanced. They'll say they're being divisive, judgmental, unloving. There will be families divided, friendships ended, churches split. It will be painful, it will be messy, but it will be necessary." We arrived back at the circle of grass in the center of the clearing, and he turned to face me, both hands on my shoulders now, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "But here's the promise," he said, and his voice was filled with such hope and joy that it brought tears to my eyes. "On the other side of the separation, on the other side of the testing, on the other side of the cost, there's glory, there's power, there's the kind of Christianity that the early church experienced, where the sick are healed, the dead are raised, the captives are freed, and entire cities are transformed by the gospel." He pulled me into an embrace, and I felt the warmth of his presence envelop me completely. "This is what I'm preparing you for." he whispered in my ear. This is what the marking is about. Not judgment, but preparation. Not condemnation, but commissioning. Not the end, but the beginning of the greatest adventure you could ever imagine. He released me and stepped back, and I could see that the sky behind him was now streaked with pink and orange. Sunrise was minutes away. The ancient oaks were becoming more visible in the growing light, their gnarled branches creating intricate patterns against the brightening sky. I need to give you some specific instructions before I go, he said, his tone becoming more businesslike, more practical. Things you need to tell everyone who's watching. He began counting on his fingers again. First, the 30-day challenge starts on January 31st. Not before, not after. That's the date. Anyone who wants to accept the marking needs to commit to starting the challenge on that specific day. Second, they need to write it down. Not just think about it, not just feel emotional about it. Actually write down their commitment. Write down the 4 elements of the challenge. Write down what they're fasting from. Write down the name of the person they're going to be radically honest with. Make it concrete, make it specific, make it real. Third, they need to tell someone, not broadcast it on social media. This isn't about performance or getting credit, but tell one person, someone who will hold them accountable, someone who will check in with them, someone who will pray for them. The enemy loves secrets and isolation. Bringing things into the light robs him of his power. Fourth, they need to expect opposition, not just external opposition, but internal. Their flesh will rebel, their emotions will fluctuate, they'll have days where they feel nothing, where they doubt everything, where they want to quit. That's normal, that's expected, that's part of the process. The marking isn't about feelings, it's about faithfulness. He paused, looking at me intently. And fifth, this is crucial. They need to understand that missing a day doesn't disqualify them. If they miss their 30 minutes one day, they don't give up. If they fail at immediate obedience, they don't quit. If they break their fast, they don't throw in the towel. They repent, they get back up, and they keep going. The marking is about direction, not perfection. It's about getting back up every time you fall. The sun broke over the horizon at that moment, and the clearing was suddenly flooded with golden light. It hit the ancient oaks first, illuminating their upper branches and making them glow like they were on fire. Then it spread down the trunks across the forest floor and finally reached us in the center of the clearing. The warmth was immediate and glorious, and I realized I was witnessing one of the most beautiful sunrises I'd ever seen. Jesus spread his arms wide, his face turned toward the sun, his robes catching the light and seeming to glow from within. "This is what's coming," he said, his voice filled with joy. "This is what I'm preparing my people for. The dawn of a new era, the beginning of the greatest harvest the world has ever seen, the fulfillment of everything the prophets spoke about and the apostles longed to see." He lowered his arms and turned back to me, and I could see tears streaming down his face, but they were tears of joy this time, not sorrow. "Tell them I'm coming soon," he said, "not in judgment, not yet, but in power. Tell them to get ready. Tell them to prepare their hearts. Tell them that everything they've ever dreamed about, everything they've ever hoped for, everything they've ever longed for in their relationship with me, it's about to become reality for those who are willing to pay the price." He walked toward me one final time and placed his hand on my forehead. The burning sensation was more intense than ever, but it wasn't painful. It was purifying, refining, sealing. "You're marked," he said. "You're sealed. You're prepared. Now go and tell them everything you've seen and heard. Hold nothing back. Don't soften the message to make it more palatable. Don't add to it to make it more dramatic. Just tell the truth, and let my spirit do the rest." And then, as the sun continued to rise and the clearing filled with light, he began to fade. Not all at once, but gradually, his form becoming translucent, then transparent, then simply absent. But his final words hung in the air like they were written in the light itself. "January 31st, the marking begins. Tell them to be ready." I stood there in that clearing for another hour, watching the sun rise fully above the horizon, feeling the warmth on my face, processing everything I'd experienced over these 4 nights. The circle of impossible grass was still there, still green and vibrant despite the winter cold. The ancient oaks stood unchanged, silent witnesses to encounters they'd probably seen many times over their centuries of existence. When I finally made my way back to my truck, the forest was fully awake. Birds were singing, squirrels were chattering, the normal sounds of a mountain morning surrounded me. But I knew that nothing was normal anymore. Everything had changed. I had changed, And if you've watched these 4 videos, if you've felt the conviction, if you've sensed the marking, you've changed too. So here's what I need you to do. Here's the practical application, the specific steps, the clear instructions. Step 1, make the decision. Right now, today, before you do anything else, you need to make a decision. Are you in or are you out? Are you willing to commit to the 30-day challenge starting on January 31st, or are you going to let this moment pass? Don't make this decision lightly. Don't make it emotionally. Count the cost, consider what it will require, and then choose. Step 2, write it down. If you decide you're in, write it down. Get a journal, a notebook, a piece of paper, something physical, not just a note on your phone. Write today's date. Write, I commit to the 30-day marking challenge starting January 31st, 2026. Then write out the 4 elements. 30 minutes alone with Jesus every day, radical honesty with God, myself, and at least one other person, immediate obedience to the Holy Spirit's promptings. Fasting from, write specifically what you're fasting from. Sign it, date it, keep it somewhere you'll see it every day. Step 3. Tell someone, identify one person, a mature believer, someone who will take this seriously, someone who will hold you accountable without judgment. Tell them what you're committing to. Ask them to check in with you weekly. Give them permission to ask hard questions. Don't do this alone. Step 4. Prepare practically. You have 3 days before January 31st. Use them to prepare. Figure out when and where you'll have your 30 minutes each day. Eliminate the thing you're fasting from. Delete the apps, cancel the subscriptions, remove the temptation. Set up your accountability structure. Get your journal ready. Prepare your heart through prayer. Step 5. Start on January 31st. At some point on January 31st. It doesn't have to be at midnight, but it needs to be that day. Begin your 30-day challenge. Have your first 30-minute session with Jesus. Take your first step of immediate obedience. Begin your fast. Start the journey. Step 6. Persevere for 30 days. This is where most people will fail, not because they're not sincere, but because they're not prepared for how hard it will be. You will have days where you feel nothing. You will have days where you want to quit. You will have days where you fail, but you keep going. You get back up. You persevere. Because the marking isn't about perfection. It's about faithfulness. Now, I need to address something important. Some of you are watching this after January 31st. You missed the deadline. Does that mean you're disqualified? Does that mean you can't be marked? No, absolutely not. The marking that happens on January 31st is a specific Kairos moment, a divine appointment for those who respond before that date. But God's grace doesn't have an expiration date. If you're watching this later and you feel convicted, you can still do the 30-day challenge. You can still pursue wholehearted surrender. You can still be part of what God is doing. You just won't be part of the first wave. You won't be among the first fruits. You'll be coming in later, and that's okay. God can still use you. God still loves you. But there's something special, something unique about those who respond to this specific call at this specific time. I also need to address those of you who are skeptical, who think this is all manipulation or emotionalism or false prophecy. I respect your skepticism. I do. Test everything. Be discerning. Don't follow me or anyone else blindly. But I'm asking you to consider this. What if it's real? What if God really is doing something significant right now? What if this really is a divine appointment, a Kairos moment, an opportunity that won't come again? Can you afford to dismiss it out of hand? Can you afford to let your skepticism keep you from responding to a genuine move of God's Spirit? I'm not asking you to check your brain at the door. I'm asking you to open your heart to the possibility that God might be speaking, that He might be moving, that He might be calling you to something more than comfortable compromise Christianity. And finally, I need to say this. I don't know what happens next. Jesus showed me these 4 nights. He gave me this message to share. But I don't know what February looks like. I don't know how the awakening will unfold. I don't know what specific form the separation will take. What I do know is this. Something is shifting. Something is changing. And those who have eyes to see and ears to hear can sense it. The age of lukewarm Christianity is ending. The time of testing is beginning. And the greatest move of God's Spirit that this generation has ever seen is on the horizon. The question is, will you be ready for it? I'm going to end this final video the same way Jesus ended our final encounter, with hope. Not with fear, not with condemnation, not with judgment, but with hope. because that's what this is really about. Not scaring people into compliance, but inviting them into the adventure of wholehearted surrender to a God who loves them more than they can imagine. The marking is an invitation, not a threat. It's a call to something better, not a condemnation of where you've been. It's a promise of what's possible when you stop playing at Christianity and start actually living it. So here's my final challenge to you. Don't let this moment pass. Don't watch these videos, feel convicted, and then go back to life as usual. Don't let the enemy convince you that you can deal with this later, that you have time, that you can ease into surrender gradually. You have 3 days. 3 days until January 31st. 3 days to make the most important decision you'll make this year, and possibly in your entire life. Will you accept the marking? Will you commit to the 30-day challenge? Will you say yes to everything God is calling you to, regardless of the cost? I'm praying that you will. I'm praying that thousands of you will. I'm praying that this message reaches exactly who it's supposed to reach, and that those who are meant to be marked will respond with wholehearted surrender. Leave your comments below. Tell me if you're committing to the challenge. Share your fears, your hopes, your questions. Let's build a community of marked ones who can support each other, encourage each other, and hold each other accountable. And then, on January 31st, let's begin this journey together. Let's see what God does when a generation finally says yes, without reservation, without compromise, without holding anything back. The sun has risen. The dawn has come. The marking is about to begin. The only question left is, are you ready?